As I say, we have Nick Piggott from RadioDNS, who's going to talk about hybrid radio innovation for the connected vehicle. Nick is an accomplished technologist in the field of broadcast radio and audio, and is both a project director and co-founder of RadioDNS, Hybrid Radio, and is working with broadcasters, audio project leaders, and CE manufacturers globally to develop strategies and product innovation. So over to you, Nick.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to find out about hybrid radio and how we can innovate with broadcast radio in the connected vehicle. I think it's always useful to start presentations like these with some context, a little bit of history, to see where we've come from in order to know why it is we're going in the direction we're going. Radio is one of the most established functions in a vehicle. I would probably put that it's the first enhancement that was ever added to a vehicle after the basic drivetrain stuff was made to work. But that doesn't mean that we've stood still. We've continued to innovate with radio in all kinds of ways, alongside innovations in the car platform hardware. And the experience of broadcast radio now is miles better than it was 15, 20, 30 years ago. But obviously, we need to understand how we can make broadcast radio relevant and effective and a really amazing driver experience in the connected vehicle. Because we know that drivers still want radio in their cars. Even in a connected vehicle, they want to be able to listen to broadcast radio. It's a must-have feature for them. So what is broadcast radio in the connected car? Well, this is where we've coined the term, leaning heavily on other words being used in the automotive industry. You have hybrid cars, we have hybrid radio. And hybrid radio is the combination of two great technologies, both of which have very, very strong and distinctive attributes. Broadcast radio is extremely ubiquitous, it's extremely reliable, and obviously it's free to consume for the driver, and it doesn't have any ongoing costs for the OEM to implement either. Once the radio's in the car, the radio will work for the entire lifetime of the car without any further investment on it. But we see the opportunity to use the connectivity in the vehicle to make broadcast radio even better by adding content, metadata, and interactivity, essentially using that connectivity tactically to make broadcast radio a better experience, an experience that is closer to other connected media experiences, but without having to rely on IP entirely. It's that seamless combination of broadcast and IP into one singular experience that is better than if you used either of them in isolation. And it's that seamlessness that's really important. We're not talking about having a broadcast radio and then next to it a streaming radio. We're about blending both technologies into one listener experience. Pick the radio station and it just works brilliantly. Our job as RadioDNS is to establish the technical standards. So we are in common with other organizations that you might be familiar with, such as W3C, who standardize the format for HTML and CSS, IETF, who deal with the transport layer of the internet with TCP/IP and HTTP. And you'll be familiar, if you work in the radio domain, with some of the existing radio standards organization like the RDS Forum that standardizes RDS radio, World DAB in Europe who standardize DAB, and our job is to standardize how hybrid radio is delivered globally. So we're not a platform provider, we're not a service provider, we're a standards organization. Just so you understand where that means we fit in the whole radio ecosystem, radio stations to continue to be radio stations, and they broadcast their content as they always have done. They may work with other technology companies. That's usual. They'll be working with third parties to help them with some of their technology function. But we establish that point of interoperability between the broadcasters and the receivers. Everything built around our standards will interoperate. Every radio station will be available to every manufacturer. Every manufacturer will be able to get access to every radio station. So beyond that line of consistency, that line of technical standards consistency, we then have OEMs working with their providers, their tier one providers, their potentially other data providers to create that full experience of broadcast radio in the vehicle. The great thing about open standards is they just work and last. There is no organization in the middle here that is required to keep things going. They're standards. In much the same way as any radio station can buy an FM radio transmitter and get on air and will be receivable by any FM radio, and similarly, any manufacturer can get anyone to build an FM radio to the standards and it will pick up any FM radio station. We work the same way. We believe that hybrid radio should be built around standards that are durable and interoperable, because that helps reduce everybody's implementation costs. One interface, one client works for all radio stations, and therefore creates the biggest ecosystem as quickly as possible. If you implement a client, it will just work. If a new radio station starts producing hybrid radio, that will just work automatically without any specific intervention. And we're here as a standards organization to make all that happen faster. We're here to remove the obstacles for everybody in implementing hybrid radio. We want to make it easier and faster and cheaper for everybody to do it. That's our role, is essentially to catalyze the development of hybrid radio. Just to emphasize what we don't do, we're not a service provider. We don't have a database, but we can tell you where to find the databases. We don't impose any controls. Nobody has any contracts with us. And we don't sell anything, and we don't compete with any service providers. We're here to make the ecosystem exist, but not to participate in it. What we do is already implemented in vehicles worldwide. So we're already implemented in production vehicles now for several years in both the North American market and the European market, with brands like Audi, BMW, VW, Porsche. And we know that many other OEMs are using our standards in part or in whole to help improve their broadcast radio experiences. So Audi were the first to market with this in 2018. They have a particularly impressive implementation of a function that allows the driver to pick a radio station, and then the radio will automatically switch between broadcast and streaming to keep listening to that radio station. So if you lose the broadcast radio coverage, it'll switch to streaming. If the broadcast radio coverage comes back, it switches back again. They've done some extremely impressive engineering work along with some of their partners to overcome things like time misalignment and level misalignment. If you get a chance to experience it, one of the disappointing things is you probably won't notice it happening. It is such a good implementation. You may need somebody to point out it's happened. BMW are using it in our standards in their connected drive product to make sure that all of the metadata to do with radio stations is kept up to date. And we're also used by some of the major platforms in this space as well, because this is a really efficient way for them to get very, very accurate metadata from radio stations into their databases to keep what they're doing up to date as well. So sometimes it's not that the OEM is directly implementing our standards. That's not necessary. Sometimes they'll work with a partner who is using our standards. As long as our standards are involved somewhere, all the benefits of them become apparent. We have a suite of open standards to do various common functions and desired functions around broadcast radio. And I'll take you through those standards so you can understand what they each do. One of the things that's really important in any kind of vehicle is to make sure that the radio stations are easy for drivers to find. They are familiar with the names of radio stations, they're familiar with the frequencies, they're familiar with the logos. And we make sure that that information can be always kept accurately updated in the vehicle. We have a standardized metadata set that can be accessed over IP. As soon as you tune into a radio station, you can find all the additional information for that station. The other thing it does is make sure that if there is a change, if something changes with a radio station, it flows automatically to the vehicle. You don't have to go chasing around various unknown third parties to ask them, why is my logo not right? Why is the station not being rebranded? And trying to second guess where they scraped that information from. If you get it right as a radio station, as you create the data, the manufacturer can be confident that what they're getting is authentic and accurate and direct from the radio station. So if there is a rebrand, it'll just happen automatically. Nobody has to intervene manually to make that happen. And that is important to get that experience, that driver experience right. When we talk about that automatic following between broadcast and IP that Audi have implemented that is using some of the metadata in that metadata set to understand where things like streaming URLs are, what codecs are available, what bit rates are available, so that it can make the best decision on how to switch between the various ways of receiving that station in the most seamless method. What that means for the driver is once they've picked a station, they stay on the station. Once they've preset a station, it will always stay on that station. It's a great driver experience. It just needs the right metadata and the right engineering behind it to make it work. We're increasing the volume of metadata that can be sent to receivers. So historically, our approach has been for our standards to work, if you have one receiver that has a client just running on that receiver, very, very thin client, should be able to get all of the additional information by asking on a service-by-service basis. So essentially, as you tune into a radio station, you can get the information for that station. If you tune to another station, you can get the information for that station. But we're also aware that manufacturers are keen to get more and more information into their own databases in order to essentially run a split architecture of a thin client and a back end that they're managing. So to better enable that, we now have what we call a fire hose option, where you can connect a high data rate connection into a broadcaster or a group of broadcasters and get real-time information from them for all of their radio stations. So fewer, bigger connections carrying more information from all radio stations. Beyond that, it's then up to you as the manufacturer to filter that down to the specific receiver that the user is using. Visual content is really, really valuable for both the driver and the broadcaster. Because vehicles now have so much more screen estate available to them, that should provide a valuable new way of keeping the driver informed about what they're listening to, giving them that information. We do a lot of work with other organizations in this space to understand the balance between providing additional information that the driver finds useful and not providing driver distraction. And driver distraction is very, very high on our list of priorities. We need to get that balance right between helpful and too distracting. So we have a set of guidelines about things like how big should the font be? How often should things be updated? What should happen with brightness at dark, at nighttime when it's dark? But the other thing our standard allows over the existing over-the-air standards is the over-the-air standards have relatively restricted resolution, a couple of 100 pixels, which looked great on vehicles 15 years ago, but now on vehicles with essentially HD screens is not a great presentation. And also we recognize that screen dimensions vary from vehicle to vehicle and model to model. So what we can do in the IP domain is the vehicle can tell you its screen size, and the broadcaster can publish something that is exactly formatted to fit that screen size. So it will take into account things like how physically big is the screen, what is its pixel resolution, how wide is it, how deep is it, and will author something specifically for that screen because it's coming in over an IP connection. The other great thing, of course, is if the IP connection is a little bit intermittent or a little bit unreliable, the audio will keep going because it's coming through broadcast. It doesn't matter if the visual is a few seconds late because it's got stuck behind a bunch of other packets or there's otherwise been some sort of data cell handover delay. Lots of broadcasters are providing content, visual content now, and we'd love to see this become more prominent as part of the broadcast radio experience in the connected car, because it's a great addition to broadcast radio and makes it closer to the experience you would get with something like Spotify. In fact, I think it's better than that. So you can get that album information, that album art, that program context information at higher resolution, larger images, and from a broadcaster point of view, we can see how much traffic is being generated by the visuals, which is important to help the broadcasters support their investment case for providing more visual content for vehicles. We've got three more forward-facing applications in development at the moment. Analytics and tagging is about answering the persistent and long-standing driver question of, what was that? It was quite interesting. Because, of course, one of the things that's really hard to do when you're driving is note down something that you find interesting. We know that people hear things on the radio that capture their interest and they would love to remember what it was. So the purpose of the analytics and tagging function is to allow the driver to do one simple action, which could be a hardware button or a software button or a voice command, but it just bookmarks what they've just heard as being interesting. That information is sent to the broadcaster, who can resolve that bookmark into something more detailed and can also deal with kind of more edge cases, like a song has just ended and the presenter has just started talking, and you bookmark it because what you're actually interested in is the song, but not what the presenter said. With that information, the broadcaster is able to look at a window of time and look at a number of events that may have been interesting to you in that window of time and present those to you as a selection, rather than it always being exactly at the time when you push the button. We've had some really great conversations with radio stations about how this is used. One radio station we talked to, which has a predominantly older audience, they said what we will do is we'll just collect all of the things that people found interesting in the day and email them a digest. So the next day they'll get an email of, here's all the things you found interesting on our radio station yesterday, because that's kind of appropriate for their audience. But other radio stations might make it available in an app or on their website. But nonetheless, what we're doing is we're taking that moment where the radio can create a critical interest point, capturing it and time shifting it to another time and another place where people can come back and interact with it. We're also very, very aware, having just referred to voice recognition, about how important this is as a topic in the vehicle today and how difficult it can be to get it right, particularly where radio station names do not naturally follow the way that they're written down. So we're providing more information in our metadata set now, not just about the names to be shown to users, this is the written down name, but also how they refer to that radio station colloquially. So the official radio station name may be BBC Radio 1, but a lot of people may call it 1FM. And it will be up to the broadcaster to provide that as an alternative way of detecting that's what the radio station is. If a driver says, tune to 1FM, this is the right radio station. And that's come out of a lot of learning and looking at drivers trying to use voice assistants at the moment to navigate broadcast radio and seeing where they're getting frustrated and where it isn't working. We're also offering the opportunity for broadcasters to surface some of their on-demand material. So you'll be aware that, of course, much of the great podcast and on-demand content is created by established broadcasters. It's an opportunity for them to offer not just access to their live broadcast, but essentially if you like this, you may also like this audio, and refer people to on-demand. So they can switch between live and on-demand, again, very simply through a simple navigation on their radio. They don't have to dig around in a podcast application. They don't have to search for things either by voice or by text. They can just ask for it directly from the radio station. I'm going to wrap up by just giving you an idea of the extent of RadioDNS's implementation. This is our global implementation at the moment. We are pretty much covered across all of North America, all of Europe, and we're beginning to grow in Asia. From our point of view, what this is for us is an exercise in helping radio stations get themselves using our standards and helping manufacturers understand where they will find radio stations that are using our standards. As I say, we've got pretty much every European country covered and all of the North American country covered. We continue to add new stations in new countries pretty much every week. It's something that just grows organically. If a radio station wants to start using RadioDNS, they can pretty much do it themselves within a couple of hours, and they will be live. I'll finish by showing you a list of the people who are supporting us now. It is a great mix of people who are involved in the entire ecosystem of broadcast radio. We have some of the biggest broadcasters in the world. We have some of the biggest car manufacturers in the world, some of the biggest tier 1 suppliers, and some of the biggest service providers. We all meet together to talk about how we can make hybrid radio work better for everybody to grow its coverage, to grow its functionality. So I'll leave a couple of minutes for questions at the end here, and I'll wrap up by asking you to remember a few key points. If you're thinking about this in the context of a radio station as a broadcaster, what these standards mean is you only need to support and maintain one interface to reach all vehicles. That means it's easier to build, easier to support and maintain. It means you know that the metadata will be consistent and accurately offered to all manufacturers. But interestingly, when we look at this from the other end of the chain and we say, what's the incentive for manufacturers to adopt our standards? It's almost exactly the same reasons. It allows you to implement one interface, to maintain it, and to support one interface with the entire broadcast radio industry globally. And you know that the information that comes over that interface will be consistent and official and accurate. So that's the story of RadioDNS hybrid radio and how we think we can make broadcast radio look absolutely brilliant in connected vehicles. We have some time left for questions, if anyone has any questions.
Are there any questions from anybody? I actually have a question for you, Nick.
Yeah, sure.
So what is the, it makes complete sense to me. What's the barrier to this sort of getting broader adoption? Sort of what are you running into as sort of, because I can't, you look at that, as you say, you look at that sort of manufacturers versus broadcasters,
Yeah.
It's just like, it's hard to see where it seems to be like a no-brainer, but obviously it's going to take some time. So I'm just be interested to see what your thoughts are.
I think what we have found for decades and decades and decades is a bit of a chicken and egg situation. Either side has to be confident that the other side is going to invest in this and implement it in order for it to grow. It's a piece of confidence work. So our job as RadioDNS is primarily to essentially operate shuttle diplomacy between broadcasters and manufacturers. So we go to broadcasters and say, you should invest the time to do this because all of these car manufacturers are going to use it. And then we go to the car manufacturers and say, you should invest the time to put this in your head units because all of these broadcasters are going to support it. I think once that confidence exists that both sides are going to do things, then the actual technical implementation is not that demanding. And that tends to be the kind of the down bit of the implementation. That's the easy bit, coming down the other side. So that's our main obstacle at the moment, is both sides looking at each other and going, are you really going to do this? Because if you are, then we're going to do it as well.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Hello, this is
Hi.
Oliver from Ford. I didn't follow the start, but I'm not sure if you're talking about AM radio, and what's the view about AM radio in vehicle is going to say bye-bye for all the OEM, or in the future, the government will say, you know what, keep AM for everybody. So what's your view for the AM radio?
Obviously, AM radio in North America at the moment is an extremely hot topic. Ford Motor Company have said that they would like to remove AM radio from vehicles. And I understand that they have good engineering reasons why they'd like to do that. I understand that. I think that it is a very brutal move in a market that has a lot of AM radio listening, and that AM listening is difficult to move to other platforms. So I'm based in Europe, and we have had AM radio, but a lot of the AM radio audience has already migrated to digital. So to DAB digital, to broadcast digital radio. So much of the AM radio audience in Europe is now listening to DAB, the same radio stations but on DAB.
Okay.
So for them, in a European context, removing the AM radio tuner does not remove your access to the radio station. It doesn't cut you off from the radio station because it's available in another platform. That is not the context in North America. So the same action in Europe will probably be, everybody's fairly relaxed about that, but it's a very much more brutal change in North America, and it may be too much to do. In terms of hybrid radio, we do have a method for supporting AM radio and for making AM radio hybrid, but it requires more AM broadcasters to get involved. Until now, much of our broadcast has been focused on FM, HD, and DAB. We're happy to talk about AM, but it needs that confidence that if the AM broadcasters are going to do it, will that be supported by, for instance, NXP? Will NXP put this into their AM silicon solution? We're happy to facilitate that for sure.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from anybody?
I will finish then by saying we do have a very small demonstration down in the Startup Pavilion, which is roughly towards the restroom sign. So if you'd like to come and see a RadioDNS implementation, come over there. I'll be happy to show you what we have.
Great. Thank you so much, Nick. We'll now be taking a break here for lunch. So take advantage to go and have a chat with Nick and explore the exhibition. And we'll be back here at 2 o'clock. Thank you so much.